Ellsbury. I am a manager on the Facebook research team. And just a little bit of background about the team. So we actually do both quantitative and qualitative research. So sort of what would traditionally be known in other companies as sort of user design research as well as market research. We've decided to merge those two teams because for us, it's impossible to really understand everything that's going on if you look at each quantitative and qualitative research in isolation. So we've decided to combine things. Just a quick note, like a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say is very tailored to Facebook. I really do not believe that there's a one-size-fits-all with research. And so, the methods that you choose, whether it's surveying, eye tracking, quantitative methods, qualitative methods, it really depends on the question that you're asking. Sometimes qualitative methods are the right ones, sometimes quant are the right ones, but really oftentimes it's both, and that's sort of going to be our talk today. Really quickly, before moving to fail stories, I promise we have a lot of them. The definition of qualitative research, according to Wikipedia, qualitative research aims to gather in-depth understanding of human behavior and the reasons that govern such behavior. The qualitative methods investigate the why and the how of decision making, not just the what, when, and where. And this is...
Yeah. So with quantitative data, I'm not going to take the Wikipedia definition because I think everyone understands what it is. I mean, we learned math when we were in grade school, I guess, or maybe even preschool for many of us, and look like that kid over there. It's all around us. It's very easy to understand, and it's very easy for us to drown in that kind of data because most tools produce lots and lots of quantitative conversion rates, numbers, counts of things, and all that. So I think I don't think it needs any more explanation than that.
Cool. So what we're going to talk about today is actually how marrying qualitative and quantitative is really the sweet spot. So, understanding what's going on and also understanding why that's actually happening is really when you're going to really understand what's going on with your product. And what we found is that when you don't combine the two, that's when you run into problems. That's when you fail. So here are some stories. So the first, if you don't marry the two, you can't understand the full extent of how people are using your product. So my example here is the Facebook Groups product. And this is the Groups product that we introduced maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not sure if you guys remember it, but the reason that we built this product is because we really wanted to provide users with a communication tool for them to communicate with groups of people that they cared about. So we envisioned people making a group for their family. We envisioned people making a group for their club soccer team, sort of like these smaller communities that they would want to communicate with on a regular basis. So post-launch, we looked at the data like we often do at Facebook, and everything looked great. People were creating groups, people were using them a lot, like everything was great, and we were like, great, success. And then we started to see something really interesting in the data, which is that people were creating groups that were 10,000 people in it, 100,000 people in it, and our technically we were not ready for that, and we weren't able to support that. But we were also confused, why were people creating these groups? So we did some qualitative research to really understand what was going on. And it turned out that they were not using them for the reason that we built the groups tool for. They were using them more for badges. They were creating groups that were called, I am not a morning person. And hundreds of thousands of people were joining that group because they really, that said something about them. Or, they were joining causes groups like 100,000 people or 1 million people against breast cancer. And, without actually looking at the qualitative data, we would not have understood that it was actually filling a need. It just wasn't the need that we built the product for. So knowing that information, knowing that qualitative information helped us evolve the product since. The second one is you miss the human touch, the inspiration behind the data. We're building Facebook for people, so only understanding the data is really not understanding the full picture at all. We need to understand how people are using our product and how they're feeling about the product. And that's really the sweet spot of qualitative research, is really understanding the emotions. One of my favorite examples here is we spend a lot of time thinking about the new user experience. So the experience from becoming a non-user, signing up for Facebook, going through orientation, all that kind of stuff. And the data, again, it tells us a lot. It tells us how long it takes people to get through registration, where they drop off, where they're having problems. But it doesn't really tell us anything about how they're feeling, or what they're excited about, what they're not excited about. So what we ended up doing is we ended up bringing in a bunch of people and actually just watching them register for the site. And it was this really, really interesting thing where you would watch them type in their name, their email address, their password, and it looked like they were in hell, basically. It was like they were filling out a test or something. And there was this moment when we took them to the page called People You May Know, which is the page where we show thumbnails of people that we think they might be friends with based on the information that they provided us. And that was the moment when people's faces literally lit up. They were so excited to see, oh my gosh, that's that kid that I went to middle school with, or that's my old cousin that I haven't talked to in 20 years. And that was the moment that we knew we had to optimize for, the moment that people sort of understood what Facebook was, understood how Facebook could really benefit them, and really sort of got it. Like we can talk about Facebook as much as we want, and we can try to explain what it is and how it's going to be great, but until you actually experience it, you're not going to get it. And so from then on, we really tried to optimize to get people to that moment where they really got it and they really found their friends and could see how it was going to be useful to them in their life. Final story from me, and then I'll pass along the mic. You won't understand the whole story of what's happening, the good and the bad. So a very common story at Facebook, and I'm sorry that these are all Facebook stories, is we'll launch a product and we'll look at the data, and the data will be positive. It will say people are really engaged, it will say people are using the product, they're using the site more, and that's great. But then you look at the blogs, and the story is kind of the opposite. People don't like the Facebook redesign, Facebook screwing its users, all of this sort of negative stories about how people actually don't like what's going on. And so the data's saying one thing and the blogs are saying another thing. So, either way you look at it, if you only look at the blogs, you fail because that only tells you half the story. If you only look at the data, you fail because that only tells you half the story. And so I think that's the best example that I can come up with why it's so important to marry the two. And so what we do now is we really try to marry the attitudinal data with the behavioral data. The behavioral data tells us how are people using your new feature, how long are they using your new feature, what is sort of like the behavior patterns there. But the attitudinal data, how satisfied are you, how trustworthy do you think this product is, how much do you like this product, how fun is this product, that's what's really going to help you understand how people are feeling. So marrying the two really tells you the whole story. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and with us, oftentimes it's both. So I'll pass it along to Heen now.
So I don't think we can ever get tired of hearing stories about Facebook, so I don't think that's ever a problem. Well, ones that I haven't heard before, at least. So I'm going to give you guys a more kind of personal perspective from my own startup and patterns I've seen across small companies, large companies, et cetera, around failure with data. One thing that Christina and I both agree on is that you actually have to marry the two. That's why we were going to talk about fail around each individual one specifically, and more about fail when it comes to when you don't marry the two. And the reason for that is that I'm guessing most of you don't even know what that means very well. So I'm going to try to go through a little bit of that as well. So one of the things is when you just focus on quantitative data, you can have your focus be just all about the numbers, and then you lose that qualitative side of the human element of why people might be doing something. So one example that I have from my own story is that we had one of our products where we were trying to optimize the sign-up process, and we were using Kissmetrics on it to optimize the funnels and the conversion rates. We had about a 2 or 3% conversion rate to activated customers, so somebody who was hypothetically gratified with the product. We spent about a month and we got it up to 7%. But then we couldn't get it higher anymore, so we spent another 2 weeks just trying to optimize. And what I mean by this is literally moving the funnel steps around, changing some of the buttons around. But the one thing we actually didn't do in this specific example, this was a while ago, is that we actually didn't go talk to customers and watch them walk through these flows. And that's super embarrassing for me to say, because now we do that all the time, and I should have known better, but we didn't do that. But what happened was, after we had a little bit of a frustrating period during those 2 weeks, we actually ended up talking to customers, And we came out with something interesting where in our flow, we actually asked them more about what type of website they have or what type of, what their role is in their company. And when we started segmenting that data with the quantitative data to see, okay, if someone's a e-commerce site or a blog, their conversion rate is different versus someone who is a software as a service business, we started making a lot of leaps and bounds in terms of understanding our customer and being able to actually understand why the numbers might be the way they are. So we actually found certain types of customers that actually had a much higher conversion rate. But if we didn't ask them that and then tie it to the analytics data, we wouldn't have got any of those insights at all. And that leads to kind of my next point, which is that during that 2-week period, and many times in the company since then and before then, we end up falling into debates. And I'm sure all of you guys have gotten into debates in your company about all kinds of things. And typically what we do now is once there's a debate, we just say, well, why don't we just test it? And typically what you guys might think when I say that is, oh, we're doing an A/B test, like we're adding a tab in the application, or we're testing button colors, I hope not, but we're testing copy or something like that. But what I also mean is that now, like, what we do is the way to end these debates is like, how fast can we put something out there and actually get feedback, even if it's from a very low number of customers? And usually when it's like a low number of customers, we'll actually walk them through those processes or those things that we want to show them before we even try to get into any real A/B testing or anything like that. And that has put an end to a lot of the debates, and more importantly, it's fostered a culture of people actually stop debating and get very opinionated. And one of the things is that we all have opinions, and it's very easy to get in this mode of debating. And so, with the project I was mentioning earlier, we had a lot of opinions about what was going on, and some of them were like, well, this type of person does this, or this type of person does that, or this type of site looks like this. And it actually took us a lot of work to get some of that data, because we had to look through every single type of site that signed up for our product. So instead, someone came up with the brilliant idea of actually, it wasn't me, but a brilliant idea of actually asking the customer. And that actually stopped a lot of this debating and a lot of this like hard work that we had to do to actually determine the answer to this question. So another point about this is that you actually miss big insights when you don't marry the two together. So in my example, basically, we wouldn't have figured out that actually different types of sites are going to utilize our product differently. And this is very early on in the product when we didn't have any real good idea beyond some hypotheses around who would actually use the product and who would get the most from it. But this is one mistake I actually see a lot of companies make, where it's like, if a really good example of this is if you're a consumer application and you're optimizing for growth in terms of just getting users, but you aren't looking at how to improve engagement, you end up actually not having the big insights that cause more people to actually keep coming back to the product. And as most of us know by now, if people aren't coming back to your product, your host, like, you're not going to have a business. And so it's these big insights that you actually get when you look at the qualitative side of your business, not just kind of the data and the metrics and all the sort of, maybe not boring stuff, but boring stuff to some. In fact, most of the exciting insights come from the qualitative side most of the time, because that helps you understand why someone's doing something. Just like with the groups example, you were seeing, I bet that's what led to these fan pages and things like that, which was an iteration from groups really, but a realization that people were using groups not for connecting with people they really knew that well, but more broad kind of causes and things like that. And I think those are big insights that you can completely miss and can actually lead to a lot of failure if you're not marrying those two things together. Oh. And this kind of sort of final big point for me, before I get into kind of the big thing, and the reason we're here actually, is that I see a lot of people testing things like button colors. So they're sitting there going, well, okay, do we think we do a test and it's like red, green, or blue. Maybe sometimes it's orange depending on your color palette. And you realize that, okay, red causes more people to click. Great. Now you've got a higher conversion rate on a button just because you changed the color. But what ends up not happening is that you didn't actually test what the button says. And so I'm really glad that like just 2 or 3 years ago, we'd see a lot more examples of button tests causing conversion increases. We're actually seeing a lot less of that now. And I believe the reason is that people have stopped guessing about this kind of stuff and actually started learning from the customer, learning from the user, and trying to figure out what actually motivates them. What is it that causes people to actually click on the button versus just the color of it? So is there something I can change about what it says? There's a super famous, at least in the software as a service world, test that 37 Signals ran. It actually helps me understand if when I look at any site, if someone's testing or not. And the test that they ran was they ran a test and they figured out that when they put the copy C plans and pricing, it converted the most. It means it just got more people to click. So now when I go look at a site and I see that button, I usually know that they're not really testing things for themselves. So in one of our products, my previous company called Crazy Egg, our button is, it might have changed now, but the one that tested the highest before was actually show me my heat map. It wasn't see plans and pricing, it was actually show me my heat map, which is what people wanted out of the product. It was basically tying to the promise that people had when they hit the site. And that's not something we could have got by looking at our conversion rates. We actually had to start talking to them and start understanding how they described our product, what they wanted from it or what they were getting from it to actually come up with that call to action. So again, stop guessing, start actually learning, and then test. And if you don't do any of that, you fail. So some of the biggest failures that I've seen, and I think that's why we're here at this conference, but some of the biggest failures that I've seen is that when people don't actually look at all the information they have, and they end up, for using a popular term, maybe they pivot for the wrong reason. Because they're looking at the data and they're like, oh, that doesn't work, my dream is shattered, blah, blah, blah. But instead, they didn't actually try to understand how the user use their product or how the users use their product. Even when you have like a very low number of users, you can figure that out. So I would encourage all of you to make sure you're kind of tying the data together, or you're probably going to end up failing.
All right, any questions? This is something I hope people have questions on. I love this stuff. I know it's a little dense, but I love it. This is exactly what your company is built on.
Are you calling us dense?
No, not them. Not them. I'm just messing up. Metrics. You see a big sheet of metrics, and it's a little overwhelming. I saw a question, yes.
So personally, to bring this more specific, what would you say was your biggest failure in this type of situation?
I'd say both of you. Come on, one of you's made a mistake with qualitative or quantitative analysis.
I can go first if you want. I'll just make one off the top of my head. I fail all the time. We fail a lot around this kind of stuff, especially because we're trying to also tell other people how to do this stuff. So I guess one of our biggest failures is we actually spent 4 months building out pretty massive feature set in one of our products, and we're about to kill it in the next 30 days. So that's basically 4 months of developer engineering design, my whole team working on this problem and realizing that it wasn't a problem worth solving. So my biggest failure was literally wasting that many months working on something that I'm about to kill, like completely. And it was meant to be a major part of the product, but not anymore.
Yeah, I think mine is actually similar. So actually, I think failure is super, super important, and we actually, I don't want to say we encourage it, but it's really part of our culture at Facebook. I think the key is just trying to fail quickly so that you can sort of move on. And I think probably my biggest mistakes have been when I haven't been willing to let go. So I saw inklings that this was going to be a failure. I saw inklings that the data was telling me one thing about a product and sort of whether it was going to be a long-term success. But I was so tied to that product that I didn't want to say goodbye. And so I think for me, it's not necessarily the fact that it was a failure to begin with. It was just that I let it sort of go on way too long.
Sorry, this mic takes a minute to warm up.
This may be more relevant for B2B companies, but when you're early stage, you only have a few customers that you can actually talk to. Do you have any tips for how to get their feedback without being too selfish with their time?
So what we do is we just incentivize them with either Facebook credits or gift cards. But what we've actually found is that people are really, really excited about giving feedback. And they're actually quite willing to take the time if you can show them that you're actually going to do something with their feedback and can sort of share, this is what we heard and this is what we're planning to do. I think if you sort of think of it more as like an investment rather than you're just taking their time, people, at least in my experience, people have been super willing to give to give us their feedback and to take the time as long as it feels like an investment to them.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with that about the investment thing. And so I think what it really boils down to is how you ask them. So you can say, hey, give us feedback on our stupid product. Or you can say, we're going to use your feedback to actually improve the product, and you can help shape what we do with it. So I think a lot of the framing I've seen on how you actually tell them, hey, and even on the feedback part, you want their feedback because you're trying to improve the product. So it's not like you're lying to them, but really it's all about how you ask them. So in my experience, it's like, especially with B2B products at low volume, beyond just the fact that people love to give feedback, like that's something that I would never be scared to ask for in a product. The other piece is just when it's a low amount of people and they've already signed up for a product and they've already bought into the promise that you're going to try to solve this problem for them. I have never really seen a problem of a company not being able to reach their customer and talk to enough of them, ever. It's just a matter of how can you increase the response rate? How can you make it so that they're actually motivated to give you the feedback? And you know where I see the most failure actually on this? I didn't think of it till right now, is actually asking them the wrong questions. That's where I see the most failure. So there's a complete art, which I think both of us missed in our presentations, on how you actually ask the customer stuff. And that's where I see more failure than anything else.
Back here.
Hi. It's interesting. There's such a foregone conclusion that you should be doing this sort of analysis. And I'd love for you guys to tell maybe some stories about failure or what happens if you don't. So can you give some examples of environments that you walked into where they weren't doing qualitative or quantitative analysis and sort of what the fail looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a classic example is what Facebook was like 6 years ago. There was no research team. It was a group of younger people who were building a site for young people, right? And at the time, that sort of made sense. It was less of a challenge than it is today because you were building a site for the people that you hang out with all the time. So you kind of knew your user base. But you know, I think the big fail there is when the user base expanded and when the demographics sort of got more diverse, you can't continue to build the product for the people that you know. And I think that's probably where we've made most of our mistakes was thinking that we knew the user base better than we actually knew it because it had actually expanded a lot more than the people who were building it.
So one way I've got a couple things here, but like I'll start with actually echoing Christina's thoughts. So one of the founders of Airbnb was up before, and he said, one of the things they did when asked a question was they actually built something they wanted. So I think the key to her point is that, okay, building something you want will give you passion for it and get you through those really hard periods in the business, but that won't necessarily help you expand that opportunity and turn into the type of business that you're probably trying to build or your investors want you to build, if you don't know it yet. So I would say that like it's really, the fail part is like when you don't start actually listening to your users and you keep thinking you're that user and you're the only one that matters and you're the one that's got all the right answers. So that's probably one of the biggest failures I see in companies where it's like they get in this little lull of like, no, I know the right answer, and they don't bother to ask any users or customers. So I think that's one big one. And another point I'd like to make on that is just that one of my favorite things to do is come into a company and ask them why they're working on what they're working on right now. Whether it's the founder and why they're working on that problem, or even anybody on the team and going, well, why are you working on that? What does that mean to you? And a lot of the time, I won't get an answer that's even satisfactory to that person. Meaning, the proper answers are more so, we heard this from users and so we're trying to improve that. Or this metric is really low and we're trying to figure out how to improve it. And here's what I'm working on. Our hypothesis is that it will improve it. So there's a lot of that kind of failure I see, which is people just don't know what they're working on. And by doing this and marrying these two together, you're actually able to get those answers out of people and operate the business much more efficiently.
Right, there's one. Elizabeth, are you in the room? Perfect. Want to come up here? So we're about to get to you. I'll take one more quick question. Any quick ones? One more. Last chance. These are two analytical pros. Somebody waved. Oh, there's a hand. Scott, you got to turn up higher if you want to actually ask it.
What tools do you guys use for measuring your data?
Good question. Tools.
Oh, great. I use my own tools.
as every startup should.
If their tools are applicable, sure. So, but really, I use my own tools, and we also build a lot of stuff internally and end up using our database a lot for doing stuff. So, for example, even though we have a qualitative feedback tool, one of the most awesome, the thing that I'm really happy that we did was on every, so we're a data product with our main Kissmetrics product, and on every interface there's a box at the bottom that makes you feel happy when you fill it out, but it's really just a feedback box, and it asks you for feedback. We get a massive amount of feedback on that box. It's very open-ended and generic today, and it probably will be for the foreseeable future, but that was the biggest thing we did, and honestly, that one just sends us an email. It's something our engineers build. It's not something that's a tool, and that's probably our biggest source of feedback in terms of volume and quality, because it's people that are just sitting there looking at something and know the box is there, and the guy that asked the question actually has filled out that box before. So.
Yeah, for the most part, we build our own tools as well. So we built our own survey tool. We also have just feedback boxes all along the site, sort of like Keaton was describing. We have used like SurveyMonkey as well for some situations. Obviously, a lot of like logs analysis for the behavioral data, but a lot of the stuff that we do doesn't require tools. It's talking to users one-on-one. I guess we do eye tracking, so that's a tool. But ethnographic research and field studies and that kind of stuff, it just doesn't really require much. So for the most part, we've built the tools that we do use. So.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. Thank you, sir. So we've got another, right before lunch here, we've got another fail tale coming up. We want to do a swap. We'll make sure our AV works.